Hello, this is the HRC training for HMIS. You should take this training if you are trying to get access into HMIS for the homeless resource centers in Salt Lake County, and you've completed your new end user homework and training. The new end user training can be found on our website, utahhmis.org, under our meeting and training calendar. If you are a supervisor or someone who's trying to get your staff trained with this HRC homework, please email us at hmis@utah.gov so we can send you everything that you will need and your employee will need to finish this training all the way. So let's talk through our agenda today. We're just going to talk through what a client will experience in HMIS from the moment they walk into the door to when they exit out of the system completely, at least for HMIS. Now, I've already used this phrase a few times, the Homeless Resource Center, or HRC. It simply refers to those 3 new resource centers that we built in Salt Lake County in 2019. In HMIS, they are set up completely the same, so I just use the term HRC to refer to all of them generically. Now, before you get into your HRC homework, we want to make sure that you are logged into the system correctly. So in the training database, you should have access to an additional work group called UHMIS Emergency Shelter Programs and a new organization called Shelter the Homeless. If you don't have access to these 2 items, then you need to email us at hmis@utah.gov so we can get you set up and so that we can know that you're working towards getting access into the HRCs with HMIS. So make sure you have that. And then before you start doing your homework, make sure that you've logged in under these 2 settings, the UHMIS Emergency Shelter Programs and then Shelter the Homeless. The location is simply where you are sitting at that moment, so you may need to change it. When I took this screen grab, I happened to be sitting kind of close to the downtown shelter, which is why it's there, but it should just be whatever resource center you're sitting in at that time. Once you are logged in correctly, you're going to get an additional workspace. You already have the home and the client workspace within HMIS, and then the HRC work group gives you access to this shelter workspace, and that's where all of the bed management stuff lives in HMIS. You can get to changing workspaces by clicking the switch button up at the top of the screen, and you will see when you're logged in correctly that you'll have 3 options. Your home workspace, which is where all of your information is and all of the reporting stuff lives. The client's workspace, which is where everything for a client resides, and then now the shelter workspace, where the bed management stuff lives. The way we've set it up in for the HRCs, most of everything you're going to have to do for the client directly will reside in the client's workspace. Unless you are doing something like reporting or you're trying to look at everything all together, you actually won't really have to jump into the shelter workspace very often. However, it is there and now you're going to have access to it as well. And I encourage you to get in there and play around with it, especially in the training database, so you can be more comfortable with it. Your homework, we're not really going to get into it at all, just to finish your basic homework for the HRC stuff. Okay, so there are a couple of unique things that we have with these enrollments we use for the HRCs that we want you to know about, but we also want you to take a moment as we're moving into this new system. We want to try to collect the client's previous homelessness history better, and we can use HMIS to help us understand if a client is chronically homeless or not better than we have been in the past. So let's start by talking about that, and then we'll talk about some of the differences in the intake or in the HRC enrollments themselves. So before you create an enrollment for a client, you should do 2 things. First, double check in the system, make sure they exist. For those of you who aren't brand new to this, you probably have noted that most clients have been around for a little bit, and they probably have several enrollments in the system already, if not dozens of them, just depending on the client. And you can use these enrollments and this history of enrollments to kind of figure out where that client has been over the last 3 years in particular, and figure out if they could potentially be chronically homeless based on what's in HMIS. So we can look here and we see Homer Simpson's dashboard here, and you can see Homer's information. This is his client dashboard, and if you click on Homer's enrollments, it pulls you to this screen, and you'll see that Homer has had 6 enrollments since January 15, 2019, and that some of these are what would be considered literally homeless type enrollments. So the street outreach enrollment is a literally homeless enrollment. He's got a shelter the homeless enrollment. So he's got a couple of things in the last several months that could indicate that he's experienced some homelessness over the last couple of years. You want to use this with these dates in addition to discussing it with the client to kind of figure out where they've been over the last 3 years. So you can answer the questions about prior living situation and if they are chronically homeless or not in the intake assessment. You can also jump into the enrollments on the client dashboard on this side menu and you will see them all as well. And then you can use that as some clues to kind of guide that discussion. The only other thing to remember about using enrollments in this way is that while HMIS enrollments are a really good start to that conversation, they are certainly not the end of that conversation. Some organizations are barred from entering into HMIS because of federal and state statute. And then as soon as they step outside of Utah, they may not, they're not going to be entered into our version of HMIS. So this is a really good starting point, but it's certainly not the ending point, and you should go off of what the client also reports to you. Okay, so let's talk about the data differences between a traditional, normal, or between most intakes or most entry assessments and the HRC entry assessment. So the HRC entry assessment collects two different pieces of information. The first one is the state of engagement, and the date of engagement pops up when you select the enrollment type. And as a community, we have decided that the date of engagement should match the project start date. This is because the date of engagement means the date in which the client becomes engaged, and for the HRC system, that is the day that they begin that enrollment. The date of engagement doesn't auto-populate in the system, so just make sure that you make sure it matches the project start date, either by copying and pasting, or just typing it in, or using the little calendar icon, whatever you need to do, just make sure it matches the project start date. The other unique data item that we collect for these HRC enrollments is this current living situation element. And that is basically getting at where the client is currently living or where they're living tonight. And so the current living situation probably for these enrollments is probably always going to be emergency shelter at entry assessment because you're enrolling them into an emergency shelter project. You can also record the contact service information. The current living situation element is new as of October 1, 2019. And it replaced the contact service information element. So you can still collect that contact service if you would like, and you can collect location, and it can be very helpful, but it's not a required by HUD standard. You can read through this page on your own, and you will have access to these slides as well, so you can get some ideas of what you would answer for each one of the open answer questions for current living situation. But generally, just read through it slowly, and you'll be able to answer everything that you need. Now let's jump into the training database, and we will talk through how to do one of these intake assessments, or how to do one of these HRC enrollments. So, this is our website. We'll get into that in just a second. This is the training database. You'll log in normally. And then when you log in, you can change your work group and your organization here. You can also change it when you log in. So when you hit use these settings. So I'm going to change it up here so I can have the correct work group. So it's just going to be UHMIS Emergency Shelter Programs. The organization will be Shelter the Homeless, and then the location is basically wherever you're sitting at that moment. I'll just leave it at Downtown Shelter right now, and then hit apply. So some things in the menu changed when I did that. We'll get into exactly what changed in a minute, but just keep in mind some things have changed. And now when I hit the switcher button, I now have access to the shelter workspace. So I can get into everything, and then there's the client's workspace as well. So for your homework, I ask that you create new clients to do your homework, remembering that most of the clients that are going to come to you in the real world will already exist in the system. And so instead of creating the enrollment that way, you would find the client and then you would create an intake. But for your homework, I asked you to create a new client. So we'll just start intake with income on any page of this client's workspace. And we'll say add new client. If it was a current client, if the client already existed in the system, we would use current client, or maybe select another client, but generally you would want to have whatever client you're looking for up here first. So we'll go ahead and add a new client. And then this is just a search form to double check and make sure that you're not creating a duplicate client. We'll use this really broadly to make sure that we're not making any duplicates. And we'll just create this client today. And when I hit next, it searched and it's found that I have created this example client twice in the system already. I'm going to make it again today. In the real world, you would want to use this as an opportunity just to double check and make sure that you aren't creating a duplicate in the system. And if you do find a duplicate in the system like this, where everything is exactly the same or reasonably close, that you know that this is a duplicate client in the system, you can report that to us. You can either email us at hmis@utah.gov just giving us the client IDs, or you can submit a help ticket up here and you can go into that further on the new end user training video. So we'll create a new client by hitting next, and there's this, and I just mentioned the new end user training video. So we have several videos here to support you. All of this stuff is gone over on this page and on several other pages. We go over this really thoroughly on the new end user training, and it's a part of your new end user training homework. If you need to review that, or you just want to watch this video, or if for whatever reason you need it, you can go to our website, utahhmis.org. And then hover over training materials and select HMIS training videos. And this video here, HMIS homework help, goes through all of this very, very thoroughly. So you'll be able to use this to help you get through all of your basic homework. And then if you have any questions going forward, you can go through it as well. So that being said, over here, I'm going to make this, I'm going to go through this really quickly. And if you have any questions, you can email us or you can watch that video. Most clients who enter into emergency shelter are probably entering in that by themselves. If they've already been in the system, they may have several people here. That's okay. You don't need to do anything with it. Just when you create the enrollment, you would just select that client. This screen is where we select the enrollment, and if you are logged in correctly, you will see the enrollments that you should be able to use for the HRCs. So the enrollments you're looking for are these STH, or Shelter the Homeless enrollments, and they end with HRC, or Homeless Resource Center. For your homework, I ask that you create a Miller Mixed HRC enrollment for all 4 clients that you are creating. And this is because the Miller Resource Center allows people of both gender identities to stay there. So you'll be able to put whatever client you input into the system, whatever client you create in that facility while doing your homework. So irregardless of what facility you'll actually be working in. So we'll select the household member. We'll just identify them. And if they had multiple people in the family, they would also populate here, and you would just need to select that person. And then the date of engagement is just the same day as the project start date. Most of the time you'll be doing this in real time, so this project start date will just be today. But if for whatever reason you have to backdate it a day, maybe you're working on a grave shift or something, just keep in mind you can change this. You can either click here and change it in the calendar, or you can type it in. You just want it to reflect the day they started staying in the shelter. So most likely it'll be the same day. And then the date of engagement, which is populated here, will match the project start date. So whatever that's going to be. So we'll do 11/26/19 because that happens to be today's date. And we'll hit save. And everything else in this workflow is exactly the same as what we did in your basic end user homework. So if you have any questions again about any of this stuff, jump back into that new end user training video, and you can watch the part about the individual page that you have a question about. The one note is this prior living or this living situation question, and this is where you're getting all of the questions from the system if you'd looked the client up before, and you're figuring out if they are chronically homeless or not, how many times they've been homeless over the last 3 years, how many months, and where they were staying at last night. So that's where these questions are going to. We'll go with this. Again, I'm just keeping this simple so that we can save the form. There are your barriers. Here's the domestic violence questions, the financial questions or the income questions. Again, check that basic homework training if you have any questions on this stuff. Here is the current living situation question. And again, this is just getting at where they are staying tonight or where they're currently living. So we just change this because we are putting them into emergency shelter to emergency shelter. You could select wherever they're going to be staying that day, but most likely it will always be this one when you're doing an entry assessment. And then if you would like to record a contact service, you can click here. And then you would just identify the service. For an intake assessment, it would probably be intake assessment. That's traditionally what we recorded for an entry assessment. And then location just would be wherever you're sitting. And then the use the geolocation just identifies where the computer is that you're sitting right now. When you first bring up this field, a little pop-up will come up somewhere up here, or whatever browser you're using. And it'll say, hey, do you want to allow the system to access your location? It's fine to do that. It just tells the system where that computer is located and isn't used for anything other than tracking clients down. So you can use that and then hit save. And that is the workflow. So we'll finish there. And it'll take us to the example client, just like it does with any other type of intake assessment that you'll do. And now we have the Miller Mixed HRC enrollment here, and then you'll have everything ready to go to kind of get started with when the client is ready to check into a bed. So let's jump back into the slides and talk about CSA cards here really quickly. So clients who enter into the HRCs, they will have a CSA card created for them. If you are UCA staff will be creating it. If you are not, they will have one created for them. The CSA card can be really handy though, because this barcode that is on this card, all of this number is the HMIS client ID. So if you have a barcode scanner, you can actually scan this into any part of HMIS that says scan client ID, and it will type all of the client ID in there and hit enter for you. And it will bring up the client's dashboard, or it will help you find it pretty easily. If you are UCA staff, or if you need to learn how to create a CSA card, because you may have to create one on the fly for a client, you can watch this video. It's also on that same training website, or that same video website that I just showed you. You can watch this video and it will walk you through how to create one. And you should know how to create one just in case you need to make one and UCA staff is not available. Okay, so let's talk about bed assignments. The rest of this, or most of the rest of this work, or this PowerPoint, is just a walkthrough on how to create bed assignments. Like I said, you will have access to these slides, and so you can read through these on your own. And you can use these colors up in the corners to kind of help you figure out which slides you should be looking at and reading extra closely if you have any questions. So like if you wanted to double check if the enrollment was open and you couldn't remember how, you could look for this green color. There it is right there, and then it'll walk you through how to do that. But I'm going to go into the live database and show you how to do it in the training database. So we have our example client here. They have an open enrollment, and you want to double check and just make sure that the enrollment that they have is open. So there's no project exit date. There's no exit destination. So this is an open enrollment, and you want to double check where it's for. So if you are sitting in the Miller and you are putting this client in a Miller bed, then you should make sure that they have an open enrollment in the Miller. If you are trying to put them into a King bed, then you need to close this enrollment and open a new one for Shelter the Homeless King HRC. So it just needs to correlate with whatever building they are staying in. And to create a reservation for a client, which basically just says that they are expected to spend the night in that bed, you just go up here to where it says housing reservation and click on it. So this, you are still in the client's workspace when you do this. So you still see client here, you'll see their name here, they appear right here, and all of their client menu items are right here. And clicking on any of these will take you to information about this client. So this is the client's workspace. But this menu, this bed facility list that you have here, this is actually the bed management stuff that lives in the shelter's workspace. So if you go over to shelter, you can actually do the same thing. You can find the same page by clicking view facilities. Exact same page. Everything you do on either page will show up everywhere else in HMIS. So we'll click on clients, and we're going to put this client into the Gail Miller Resource Center. So we'll click there. And this is a female client, so we'll have to put them into a female dorm. So we'll just put them in this alternate women's nightly beds just because it's on the top and it's easy to find. So we'll put them in here. Right now, as of the recording of this video, there is a slight glitch in the system, in the training database. So if you come to a room and it looks totally empty, that is this glitch. And to fix that really easily, all you have to do is click this change the date button. And it will reload the room and it will show you everybody that is in the beds, and you'll be able to see who is there. When you get into a room to create a reservation, you just want to find an empty bed and follow whatever policies that you may have. But generally, you're just looking for an empty bed. We'll put this client in bed 24 here. When I hover over it, it's empty. There isn't another client in there. And I'm going to right click on it to pull up this little menu here. You can left click on it or normal click on it. And if you do it twice, it will pull up a check-in menu, which you can use, but you can't use it to create a reservation. So we're not going to use that right now. So I'm just going to right click right here and I'm going to say new reservation. And when you're in the client's workspace doing it, the nice thing about this is that all of the client's information auto-populates. If you were doing this under the shelter's workspace, because you can get to this exact same spot in the shelter's workspace, you would also have to search for the client, which is not too hard. You would just click on this little search button and you would look them up. For a reservation, you will create a begin date and an end date, and the end date in your homework assignment is 30 days. And that's just what I said to do in the homework. It's not anything other than practicing how to create reservation. And then you have to select a enrollment. So we'll do this enrollment that we've created, and this is why you need one that is open for the correct facility. And then we'll hit save. So you may get an error like this. In the training database, this is not a problem. In the real database, you want to double check that. You want to make sure that the room isn't overfull, and you're not overfilling the facility. So this is fine for right now. So we'll hit save. And now the client, if you appears in that bed, their little icon appears there. If you hover over them, they've got a reservation listed. And if you go back to the client dashboard, you'll see that there isn't anything new here. Nothing changed on this. But if you click on reservation history, you'll now see that this client has a bed reservation for the alternate dorm, bed 24, and it started on 11/26 and it ends on 12/26. So if a client comes to you and says, hey, I have a reservation, not sure if I checked in yet, or hey, I have a reservation, or I don't know if I have a reservation, all you have to do is find the client and then click reservation history and look at the one at the very top. Because as they get more and more reservations, more will be listed, and the newest one will be on the top. And then just double check and make sure that the end date hasn't passed yet. And now the client has a reservation. When you are checking a client into the facility, you would double check this. Just make sure you got the bed correct, and the room correct, so that you know that you're putting them in the same bed for the night. You can use this as just kind of a reminder, just in case the client doesn't know it off the top of their head as well. Another little note about reservation. So reservation really is only saying that the client is expected to spend the night there. It doesn't tell the system that the client was literally homeless that night. The only thing that tells the system that the client was literally homeless is a check-in or an emergency shelter service. So you can create a reservation and kind of hold that bed for that client, but until you check them in, we don't know if they were there or not. for data standards, and so we're not sure if they were literally homeless that night. So make sure if they're spending the night that you check them in. To check a client in, you would just click on housing reservation again, get back to that bed map, and then you would just go back to where you checked them in before, so the Gail Miller Resource Center. And then I put this person in the alternate women's dorm, and then there's that glitch again, so I'll click this. And there's the client right there. And so once you find the client, and you can do this anywhere you see their name in the bed. So you can hover over here where it says example client. You can also find them on the list here where it says example client, just whatever their name is. So you would just hover over it, and then you just right click on it again and check them in. And with the check-in, really all you should have to do is select the enrollment. Sometimes there's a couple of ways to get to this form that I'm not going to go over in this video, but sometimes people will figure out a way to get this checkout date to populate right here, or right here. There'll be another date field right here. If that happens, just make sure that the checkout date is one day after the check-in date. So for this client, it would be 11/27/19 because it's 11/26 right now. What will happen if this populates is if they have a reservation, the checkout date will default to the end of that reservation. These are night-by-night shelters, and so a client needs to check in every single night, so one night per check-in. So you just want to double check that. But if you go through it this way, it won't be an issue. It will do it correctly for you. You don't have to worry about it. So we'll hit save. Again, there's that error. That's fine in the training database. Let it load for a second. There you go. So now the client, if you hover over it, they've got a check-in and a reservation. So they are checked in for the night. If you click on the client dashboard, you'll see that you've created a new emergency shelter service for today. And that's what tells the system that that client was literally homeless that night and in emergency shelter. And then if you click on shelter check-in history, you'll see that the client has a bed right here with a check-in, check-out date. So if a client comes to you and says, hey, I've already checked in tonight, I have a reservation, you can check here, and then you can check the shelter check-in history, and you can see if they've checked in or not, and you can let them go into the building or whatever you need to do. For your homework, I have you create a second check-in for each client to practice something else. So we'll get back to where we checked the client in. We'll change the date in the room to be tomorrow night. So today is 11/26, so tomorrow is 11/27. We'll select that, and then we'll just select go. And really all we've done is we've told the system that it is now 11/27 in this room. And so we can see how it looks. What changed for the client is now they don't have a check-in anymore because, again, the room thinks it's 11/27. So we can check them in for the next night. So I'm going to just right-click on the client again. We're going to check them in again. Just like we just did, and we'll do the enrollment and hit save. And then when you go over here to shelter check-in history, you'll see they have two check-ins, one for tonight, one for tomorrow night. What happens a lot of the time is a client will check in at, say, maybe 7 o'clock at night or whatever, and by 10 o'clock, they're no longer in the building. They did not spend the night for whatever reason. And you may need to clear the bed to allow somebody else to stay there. And you want to tell the system what actually happened. So if a client checks in but they don't end up staying, you need to remove that emergency shelter service and that check-in so that we can accurately say, okay, this client did not stay that night, even if we originally had it marked that way. So how you can go in and delete that is you just find where that check-in is. So I changed the date in the room to the 11/27, and I found the client, and I'm just hovering over them, and I'm just going to right-click on it again. And we have some extra options now, and I'm just going to do delete check-in. That's all that you need to do. And it's going to ask you, hey, are you sure you want to delete this? And our answer is yes. This is okay. And now you've deleted a check-in, and this is reverted back to showing that they have a reservation for the night, but they are not checked in. And you can check another client into this bed. So you could right-click here, new check-in, and then find a new client and check them in, even if you can find it off of here. In the system, you could potentially have two people in the bed. So like this one, it looks like there are two people in this bed right now. So you could potentially have two people in a bed in the database, as long as there aren't two people actually fighting over a bed in the real world. That's not really a huge issue. So if a client has a reservation, they don't stay, you clear the bed, you allow somebody to check in for one night into that bed, to sleep there for that night, in the system, it's going to look like there were 2 people staying in that bed that night, but one will be a reservation and one will be a check-in, and so it'll be 2 different things. And that's okay, as long as there aren't 2 clients fighting over the bed. You just don't want to have 2 check-ins in one bed, or 2 reservations into a single bed. If we go back to the client dashboard, you will see that this client now only has that 1 emergency shelter service because we deleted it, and now the check-in is just for that 1 night. So they were only literally homeless on 11/26, and they no longer have that indicator that they spent that night in that emergency shelter on 11/27. All right, so let's jump back into the slides. We'll skip past all of this, and we'll talk about exits. So exits for the emergency or for the HRCs is another kind of unique thing that we have for the HRC enrollments, because we have assigned what we call an auto exit to these enrollments. And what an auto exit means is basically if a client doesn't receive emergency shelter service for 7 nights or more, the system will automatically exit the enrollment back to the last night they received service. And the reason we did 7 nights is pretty simple. It's a HUD standard. If they've been out of emergency shelter for 7 nights, we want to try to figure out where they were and if it was a safe place for them and if it's something that we could sustain for them to keep them housed. So they need to kind of go back through that diversion conversation and do a full intake again, which is why the system is automatically exited. The challenge with auto exits is that we get a lot of these data not collected data points when we use auto exits or no exit interview completed. And this happens quite a lot with any enrollment that has an auto exit, and it's something that we can address in this new resource center model that we are using. So this is kind of what it looks like when a client's enrollment auto exits. It'll say no exit interview completed, and then you'll look at the assessments and you won't have an exit assessment associated with it. You'll just have an entry assessment. So it'll have the date, the enrollment, and then instead of exit, it'll say entry. And there would be another one here if they had an exit assessment completed. We want to try to collect where clients are going more often because it just kind of tells us more about the client, more about the services we're providing, and it gives us a better idea of how we can better serve clients who may be coming in and out a lot. So we want to know where they're going whenever possible. So let's walk through how to exit an enrollment. Again, you get some walkthroughs and some things to look at, but I'm just going to jump into the training database and kind of show you how to go through this. So let's do that. Okay, so this is now an enrollment that has auto exited, and you can see there's a project exit date here, but the exit destination is no exit interview completed. This is your clue that this enrollment was auto exited. You can also look at assessments here, and you'll see there's no exit assessment as well. If we pretend that example client auto exited from emergency shelter from this enrollment on 11/26 and is now returning to any of the Shelter the Homeless HRC enrollments 7 nights later, so around December 2nd, I think, is returning to emergency shelter, you can now ask this client if they've come back, hey, where did you stay on 11/26? And if they can reliably say, oh yeah, I definitely stayed at my mom's house that night, cool, you can put in that exit assessment information into the system. If they're not able to reliably answer that question, you ask them, where did you stay 11/26? And they say, I don't know, I think I stayed here, not sure. Go ahead and skip this. You would only want to do this if they were completely positive at where they were staying that night. Now, the other side of this and the better way to collect this exit destination information is to do it when they're leaving the shelter. So if you know where a client is going when they're leaving the shelter, even if you're not the one that's responsible for putting in the exit assessment, you should let whoever is responsible know where they're going, or you should put it in before the enrollment auto exits. That's really the best way to do this, but if they're coming back, you can also try to capture this information at that time. Another note about doing this after they have already auto-exited, the system will lock it down after about 90 days. So if it's been a while, so if they left in the middle of the summer and now they're coming back, even if they absolutely know where they stayed without a doubt, you wouldn't be able to put in an exit assessment and put in this information into the system because it's just been too long. And in that case, it's okay as well. Go ahead and move on to creating that enrollment for that client. So to create an exit assessment for them, when they're coming back in this situation, you would just want to click on the drop-down menu here, and then you would just click Edit Exit Workflow. And then you would answer these questions. If they're coming back in like the middle of December, or just any time in the future, this exit date will be the day they auto-exited, not the current date. Most of the time when you create these assessments, this date is the same as the day it is today, but when you do this in this way where you're editing it, it's now now it's the day it auto-exited. So you would want to ask these questions as if it was that day. So again, pretending it's like mid-December, you would just say, hey, on 11/26, where did you stay? I stayed with family. Cool. Save. And you would go through the exit workflow normally, just asking the questions as if it was 11/26. I'm going to make this as quick and simple as possible. Again, you should reference that training video if you have any questions about any of these pages. But we'll just get it to where it'll let us save. So here's the current living situation question. This might be a little bit different. This will be a little bit different because you're asking this as if it is 11/26. So on 11/26, where did you stay? I stayed with my mom. And so we're going to staying with family. And now you're going to start getting these conditional logic questions because these questions are geared towards enrollments that are for literally homeless persons. So emergency shelter and street outreach enrollments get this particular question. So when you put this current living situation as anything other than an emergency shelter or literally homeless situation, it's going to want to know some more information. Do the best you can with this. Answer them one at a time. They're all yes or no questions. It seems a lot more daunting than it is. So is the client going to leave their current living situation within 14 days? Yes or no? What happened on 11/26? Did they come back to emergency shelter in 14 days? Any subsequent residents been identified? Yes or no? Any family resources or support networks? Yes or no? Lease or ownership interest in the last 60 days, yes or no? 2 or more times in the last 60 days, yes or no? And then hit save. So it looks a lot more daunting than it is. And then you will have hit finish. And now you have created an exit assessment associated with this enrollment. And then you can go in, if they're coming back to shelter, you can create that entry assessment while knowing that you've collected this information correctly. You will also see it if you click on assessments. You'll see this exit destination, and this is what it will look like if they had one in the system already. They may have lots and lots and lots of assessments here. You would just want to look for the enrollment, the date that it was exited, and then just look at the type. So if they had many here, you would just look for those 3 things and you would be able to find it. So let's jump into the training database again, or the slides. This is just a walkthrough on how to do it. Oh yeah, I forgot one small thing. So let's jump into the training database and I will show you what I forgot to show you in the rest of the video. If you are working with a client in the bed map and you need to move them around in the bed. So for example, our example client here, they actually, for whatever reason, they need to move to this bed. The best way to do this is to delete the check-in and then recreate a new check-in over here. Or if they have a reservation, the same thing. If you need to move their reservation, you would delete the existing reservation and create a new one in whatever bed they should go to. What is really tempting to do, and what we have found that you shouldn't do, is click on the client and drag them, especially if they have a reservation. Because what happens is that kind of breaks down the reservation system, and some of the reporting stuff that happens behind the scenes doesn't really know what to do with that movement. So even though you can pick up and potentially drag clients or icons around in here, you shouldn't be. You want to do this in a way where you delete that. So this is all stuff you should not be doing because it will break the system if you do that. Instead, go ahead, you would delete whatever you need to change, and then you would just do it in a different bed. You would just put it wherever they need to be. I'm doing this in the shelter workspace instead of the client's workspace, so I have to look up the client. It may give me an error because this client has a reservation in a different bed. Oh, maybe not. So now they've moved. So that is the appropriate way to take care of that, not by dragging it, even though it would seem like that would be the easier way to do it. It does kind of break other stuff. Anyway, thank you very much. I hope that you found this helpful. Thank you.